Hey, and now we are live. Welcome to the Superlative Podcast. I'm Edward Bushi. One guest, no edits, no post production, just a sharp live conversation about what it takes to reach higher levels and what comes next. So let's get into it. I want to warmly introduce Vishesh, who argues India's deep tech flywheel only started turning 5 years ago, while America's has been spinning for 30. Before we get into your story, I want to say a really warm welcome and excited to have this conversation with you. I'd love to know, what is Special Invest and what are you building right now? And then we'll come back to that at the end.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me over, Edward. Look forward to talking about this.
Oh yeah, but could you describe what Special Invest is in
Yeah, of
like two
course.
sentences?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, quick background. My name is Vishesh Rajaram. I'm a co-founder at a fund called Speciale Invest. We're a science and tech focused venture capital fund. We invest very early in companies in the field of energy, space, manufacturing, and health. We
Yeah.
largely operate at the intersection of academia and industry. Um, yeah,
Deep
that's
tech.
really what we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fashionably called deep tech now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually excited for this call. So I have chatted with a lot of VCs in India, and a lot of them are doing like the really intense stuff, right? There's a seriousness behind the industry. But before we get into that, would love to understand your backstory. Like where would you get your start? You've been in Indian venture capital since 2000
Yeah, I've
seven.
been doing this for too long now. So just quick background, I have a degree in finance. I started my career in consulting
Yeah.
in the automotive sector, transitioned to banking and lending, ran a pharmaceutical business that I inherited in the family, then sort of stumbled upon venture capital in the year 2007. And honestly, back then venture was rare. A handful of maybe 8 to 10 venture capital funds. I got hired
Mm-hmm.
into one of them as a early employee. Spent 10 years, saw the whole wave of tech breaking out in India, mobile phones, mobile penetration, data, cloud, SaaS, consumerization, and opening up of the financial infrastructure in the country, which has now led to payments, lending, wealth, all of that creation.
Mm.
Then about 10 years ago, somewhere late 2016, I sort of said I want to go back to being an entrepreneur again. Decided to leave the organization I was working for and co-founded Special with a classmate of mine from business school.
Yeah. And and
And
and oh, sorry.
the
Yeah.
rest is history. Yeah,
So in 2016 you started Special Invest, and
that's
that's
correct.
wow. Yeah, so you've been in this company for like 10 years now. So
Yep,
yeah, that's
getting old.
really no, no. I mean, like congrats and the milestone so far. And the from our onboarding call, right? You described that you can correct me if I'm wrong in my characterizations, but like you your learnings are very local. It's all built in India, right? And
Yep.
how is being India only like shaped the way you invest?
So I think we're on India only from where we invest in or where our companies are domiciled, but it's
Mm,
not India only from whom we're building for, right? The four the
interesting.
Yeah, so I think the grassroots of where we look for tech trends and mega trends is at the grassroots of Indian academic institutions, the centers of excellence, the equivalent of the MIT Media Labs back in India, to really see what are researchers working on. Then we sort of go further down to drill in to what are opportunities in these subsectors and these subtrends. That sort of allows us to find the diamond in the rough or the diamond in the haystack, if I could call that right. So that's sort of how we go about in finding opportunities or identifying trends ahead of time.
Hmm.
From whom we're building for, they would largely fall under two buckets.
Yeah.
There's certain buckets, and of course, geopolitics is evolving every day depending on what shows up on Twitter. But we're
Oh yeah.
increasingly have a few sectors that you're building for India first, and we've got a few sectors that you're building for the rest of the world from India, right? So if I had to sort of take the four broad sectors we operate, which is energy, health, manufacturing, and space, right? So clearly, energy is something that we're building for India first because there's a growing need for per capita energy consumption. There's also a need for energy transition and to make ourselves resilient to the extent we can and not depend on fossil fuels. So that's very much a build for local, build for India
Hmm.
opportunity. If you look at space and health, it's clearly leveraging India capability, but sort of building for the rest of the world because the markets there are very global in nature.
Mm,
And manufacturing sort of falls more on the global side than the local side because there again you're
yeah,
leveraging India capability, India infrastructure, India talent, India knowledge base to build for other markets. So yeah, so
gotcha.
3 or 4 times we're building for the rest of the world from here.
So it's interesting because I'm reminded of a podcast episode I did with Craig Taggart, right? Who was basically investing in like quantum technology in the United States, and the real thing that moved, or rather that helped him get confidence in that sector, was the United States government. Oh, did I lose you? Uh oh, ladies and gentlemen, we're just experiencing some technical difficulties. Oh, Vishesh, do we have you? Uh
Uh,
oh. Uh oh. Hey, we got you back.
yeah,
Nice.
there I am.
So,
Sorry, I had a
yeah, yeah.
hop Wi-Fi at home.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So, like, I wanted to bring up a previous guest, and he was talking about how the American government, right, really wanted to spur investment in quantum and quantum infrastructure locally in in the states, and that's what kickstarted a lot of the investments in that area. And I'm wondering, it might not necessarily be the government, but like what spurred all this activity um, that you're involved in right now.
So I'm glad you touched upon this. I'm glad you touched upon this. I think there are a couple of themes, right? One was to actually look at and realize that technically and from a capacity, capability, and knowledge standpoint,
Yeah.
I believe the country is on par with with the top innovators in other parts of the world, and that sort of led us down the rabbit hole of finding what the world of academia and India is building and try and find convergence between academia and industry, right? And like I said, we've been doing this for 10 years now. But what's very exciting is I think in the last 5 years,
Mm,
there's a strong policy push from the government. And I'm glad you mentioned the quantum technology in the United States. India has a national quantum mission, which is now up and running for the last 36 months
hmm.
with a fairly large budget to support young companies and startups that are working on critical geosensitive national technologies, right? And the equivalent of that is being done for hydrogen, it's being done for semiconductors, it's being done for nuclear energy. And
Wow,
therefore,
that's a
you're
lot
now
of
starting to see that for all
benefit.
of these smaller subsegments, you've got these sort of scaffolds, if I can call them, where companies can go sort of build and anchor themselves around.
Yeah.
And I think the other big announcement that came, I think, less than a year ago is the equivalent of DARPA, and it's called the RDIF, which is a Research and Development Investment Fund. And they put together a very large sum of money out there to essentially work in commercializing deep tech. And some of
Mm,
that is going to play out in the years to come. But I think these are all the tailwinds that's really pushing forward, building from India for India and building from India for the rest of the world.
hmm. That's really fascinating. That like you know the idea of nations, right? Like nation states, really like um, how do I even say this? Signaling to an industry they want something and they're putting money down, and then it encourages
Yeah.
other investors to do the same. Um, I wonder also like going back to the other guests that I've chatted with and you're in deep tech, in for lack of a better word, right? So I'm like, that's a very intense avenue to be in because you'll need to have like academic knowledge, right? Or like be up to date on the cutting edge of what your new technology is. How does a VC firm like get to that level? Because you would have to be an academic yourself or to and read papers yourself. That's how I'm understanding it.
Yeah, I don't think that's far from the reality, right? I mean, a typical day
Mm,
for most of us involves doing a lot of reading, understanding research reports, papers, looking at science journals to figure out where the technology curve is leaning towards, and then sort of corroborating that with two important constituents. One is really the researchers and the scientists and the world of academia in India,
Mm.
and two is also talking to industry, because you don't want to be building something that nobody wants. You want to be building something that somebody wants, and
Yeah.
you want to be in a position to sort of validate or corroborate around the value chain of the tech or the product that you're building on who really needs it, what do they want it for, how quickly do they want it for, what are they willing to pay, how
Mm.
important is it. So that sort of then gives you a criticality matrix of, hey, not only is this great tech to build that nobody else can build or nobody has built, but a lot of people want it.
Hmm. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So, you said something on our onboarding call, right? And it stuck with me. That venture capital began at the intersection of academia and industry, and this happened in America, Israel, Japan, and Australia, and that shouldn't
Yep.
be different from India. And yeah, like why does that intersection matter to you?
See, I think when you're building frontier tech or deep tech, you're essentially building things that don't exist, right? And those ability to build these things that don't exist come from two very important characters. One is a strong domain understanding or technology understanding
Domain. Okay.
of a particular science that you ought to have spent more than 2 3 years of just college time picking it up, right? This goes back to this famous 10,000 hours of doing a particular task that makes you a master in it, or spending a certain amount of concentrated time on a particular sector segment or theme just gives you that level of intelligence, right?
Okay.
And we've increasingly been noticing that academia is a great watering hole where you find such people. And
Okay.
what's what's changing, particularly in India, and I know we touched upon this, 5 years flywheel started moving,
Yeah.
is India in the last 5 10 years has significantly invested in the centers of excellence in these top academic institutions. And that's been a big watering hole for high quality researchers of Indian origin, not only from India, but from other parts of the world that are coming back to research and build some of this. And they're also anchoring large business houses around these centers of excellence with the view of commercialization and not just research. And I think that's driving a lot of the early companies or early ideas that are sort of fructifying from the world of academia into startups and then into institutions.
Mm. So you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like the national strategy of the U.S. again, investing in quantum, but not quantum, but universities, and for specific areas, like in
That's
with
right.
the intent of later downstream it creates industries and new ones, new companies. So I come from I'm of a Filipino background, right? And I think there's a lot of like where I come from, the Philippines could learn from how you guys do business and do development. Um, One thing that also stuck with me is the concept of that of you, the words you said is nonlinear and incremental technology, right? And you look for the non-linear. But before that, right? How could you describe what those two concepts are? And then how do you find the non-linear?
Yeah, I think so. Many times you come across tech and whenever you look at technology, you're going to have to also start thinking about what impact this technology is going to have on something, somebody, some customer, some product, right? And every time you see that the impact is anywhere between 10 and 20 or 30%, then it's all sort of incremental, right? Think about
Okay.
batteries, for example. You meet young entrepreneurs that are saying that, hey, we're building a battery which is far better than what you can get from Japan or Korea, and then you sort of get deeper to understand, and then you realize that the fundamental innovation is very similar, and they're doing some innovation in packaging or local manufacturing, but that's not
Sure.
going to give you a significant advantage in the medium to long run. But at the same time, when you come across someone who's saying I'm building a completely new chemistry or a completely new architecture to building a battery, then you're likely going to be 2 3 4x better than status quo. So I mean, I define incremental as a few percentages better than what's already there,
Yeah.
and non-linear is when you do giving something that just doesn't exist, or you're beating the bar
Yeah.
by a few hundred times. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when you're thinking of like incremental, I'm thinking like a company that wraps another technology on top, right? Which is not necessarily building anything radically new. Um,
Yeah.
but my there's a trade-off though, right? With nonlinear stuff or deep tech, right? Like they need time to develop. How do you deal with that in the
Well, they
fund?
just not only need the time to develop, they're painful. It's a long journey. There's a gestation period. The risk is
Mm,
higher and it needs time. Yeah, it's not easy. But when you get, as people famously say, and and I quote this quite often, as Vinod
yeah,
Khosla famously says,
yeah.
the 5% odds of getting something right and changing humanity is totally worth it, right?
Because of
And therefore,
the results,
just because
the
of the
output.
non-linear outcomes and the impact it has on an industry or on humanity or on quality of life, if it's particularly in the healthcare sector. Yeah, and I think that those are sort of those are the other side of the trade-off, right? You want to be taking risks, but you want to have non-linear outcomes if you get it right, and that's the draw. That's what excites. At least that's what excites me to sort of focus on frontier tech.
Would it be fair to characterize nonlinear as exponential?
Yeah,
Like
hundred
the
percent. Yeah,
Okay, that's very interesting. So, I want to like lean in on what you're doing at Speciale Invest because like you talked about nonlinear, you talked about deep tech, and there's a lot of great talent and teams coming from India. Would you like to like bring up some of the companies that you've supported?
yeah. I think we have a long list. I'd love to put some of them on on the podcast. We're very early investors in a company called Agnikul Cosmos. This came out of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, which is incidentally where I live.
Yeah.
And this is I met a three-member team 8 years ago that had a vision that they would reduce the time to make rockets by 3D printing the entire engine in
What?
72 hours, as against
Okay.
months or weeks by existing players. Of course, it was non-linear. It was an exponential investment. It was a big risk to write the first check at a stage where most things didn't exist other than three people in a room.
Mm.
I think they've done a stellar job. It's been a big payoff for our fund. We were the first investors. We continue to remain among the larger financial investors in the company, and they've done remarkably well. Launched their rocket, maiden launch successful in 2024, gearing for their second launch, which will be commercial very soon. So that's
Mm.
exciting because they took a already very hard business of building rockets and said they will disrupt it by reducing the time it makes to make these rockets by focusing on additive manufacturing and
Yes.
3D printing a bespoke engine as against traditional manufacturing methodologies which take a lot more time.
Yeah, so I can imagine that team like had to reinvent a lot of the systems to like making the engine,
Yeah, I
and
think even designing the engine ground up, right, and sort of it's very
yeah,
different when you do additive versus subtractive manufacturing.
yeah,
Another example is a company called E-Plane Company. As you may guess from the name, they make electric planes.
I like
And the whole
drones.
view was, you're
Oh,
building electric planes for not drones, planes,
planes. Yes. Okay.
passenger planes, and the passenger planes was in the context of developing markets where you're not necessarily having airports and runways, but you're able to take off vertiports and fly long distances, right? And this is a company that essentially came up with a product that can land and take off in a half a basketball court or two car parks, and fly intracity and intercity.
Mm. So okay, that's I can see that being useful for like islands or non-developed places. Like let's say
Well,
the Himalayas,
India is
for
a large
example.
country, by the
Yeah.
way, and there are many cities that are within 200 kilometers of range from each other, um, which is long but short enough for larger planes to function, but long enough for travel by road to be painful, and that's sort of the market they're playing into.
Gotcha. So, you when you I think you described the funds, or rather Special Invest. You run two streams: pre technology and then pre
That's right.
seed with three
Yes, I
funds.
think
And
for the
then,
longest of time,
yeah,
we were focusing on just on the pre-seed
yeah,
world, where we're typically investing in very young companies or founders or business plans or ideas, where we're essentially funding them to build technology, right?
yeah,
And then we began to realize that these companies do sort of need more capital to get through the commercialization phase, which is, once you've solved the technology and you get into early product, then you need to talk about product and commercialization. Therefore, as the deep tech market in India has gotten more mature, we've also built our second stream of investing strategy which essentially focuses on pre-commercialization or at commercialization, where we're bringing capital to essentially transition them from just technology startups to commercial institutions.
I want to ask because like I'm a founder in a technology startup, right? So we don't build hard physical items, but I'm just trying to like imagine what the journey is for like a team that's doing deep tech. They need to manufacture these things, so it's not easy to get a customer paying for it yet, right? So like. And then it would mean that there wouldn't be any like revenue on the bottom line. Um, how does a company look like when they're making traction to you that you're like, okay, you're not making money, but I can trust that this is doing well.
Yeah, I think the way whenever you look at risk top down, it's pretty steep, it's pretty scary, it's very hard to underwrite. You over time learn to just look at risk bottom up to saying, hey, what are the 10 things you need to do to get to the point where you'll have some revenues or some customer conversations?
Mm,
What's the roadmap to building these 10 things? How much time does it take and how much capital does it take? And then you're in a position to think about capital across time and risk.
mm,
And then it's a lot easier to underwrite them in phases, right? And if you're, of course, from our pre-seed fund, the first phase is to solve technology risk, is to build the product, right? And there going in, you're making this assumption that it's going to take you 6 to 8 quarters to build this, and this is the amount of capital you need to get through this phase. And you sort of sign up for that upfront, and you know what risk you're biting into.
mm.
But you also know what milestones you're looking to sort of measure before you get the next round. And these milestones don't have to always be revenues and customers in younger companies. It's going to be different phases of technology and product and de-risking the technology and product. And then, of
Okay.
course, at some point of time, these have to be commercial businesses to transition.
You talked about like a lot of the founders that you like support and fund are from academia, right? And that's a interesting source of founders. They're not necessarily like entrepreneurs who like start at a garage or drop out of school, right? And they must have a different mentality. I want to know if is there anything common patterns that they do right or do wrong as an academic based kind of founder that you've noticed?
No, I'm glad you asked this question because I think this is the biggest myth. And most people sort of assume that the guys coming in from academia don't understand business, don't understand commercialization that intuitively. A big surprise, and I think a lot of credit to people like yourselves that are creating good quality content. That a lot of them are a lot more well informed. Yeah, all the entrepreneurs that we've invested in, or the ones we work, or the ones we meet,
Yeah.
have a very good sense of what it takes to build a business, hire a team, think customer, think product, think margins, think money. So you're not necessarily talking to somebody who just knows theory and who doesn't think about business. I think that world's changed.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of the people from the academy are also younger people. They're in their mid 30s, mid early 40s, or late 20s. So they read a lot more. They're a lot more well informed. Their colleagues or classmates or counterparts are building companies in some other part of the world. So there's a lot more information flow between all of them. They're a lot more well informed about what they're signing up for and what it takes to build a business.
Okay.
That's a
So
that's a big
sounds
change.
like
That's a
yeah.
big
So
change.
like that's interesting that investors like underestimate or mischaracterize founders from academia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really really cool. Um, could you describe like the flywheel effect? It seems like a really a big thing that's just starting to like begin in India. Um,
Yeah.
just for our guests, like what's the flywheel effect that you were talked about where other countries are doing it? It's moving very well, but not. It's just started in India.
Yeah, I think a few things, right? I think the biggest thing is, the market needs to mature to be able to take long-term risk.
Okay.
So that's the first piece, which means you need entrepreneurs willing to sign up to build something long term, to build something hard, to build something that hasn't been done before. Now,
Okay.
the good news is that India is a large country and there are enough such people who think that way. Now, you need the environment to sort of build this around. And that's where the centers of excellence in academia that become a watering hole or the testing ground, where there's infrastructure, there's a little bit of capital, and there are customers or large corporates willing to spend time there. to effectively build the MIT Media Labs in subsectors in India, be it in rocketry, be it in space, be it in energy. And so that's one part of the flywheel where you've got someone thinking about something and there's an environment to incubate the idea, right? That's one end. The other end is a growing pool of capital available. When we started this business 10 years ago, there were maybe less than five of us investing in science and tech. And I think that number has grown five times in the last 10 years. So just the amount of capital that's available for somebody who wants to build, at least in the early days, is not far away. I mean, it's still hard work. It doesn't come easy, but it's available. At least there are a dozen plus investors that you could meet, talk to get a handle on things. So that's the
Exactly.
other part of the flywheel. The third part of the flywheel is the policy sort of tailwind that's pushing and saying, hey, these are the top 5 or 10 sectors that's nationally critical, and the government's willing to step in either as a customer or as a grant provider to
Yeah.
help you build through this gestation period where
And
it takes
de-risk
you
the
more time
industry.
and de-risk the industry, right? And they're also savvy. They're building this in sectors where there's a big market, right? And first principles of life, right? The success always breeds success. You need a handful of them to be successful for the next set of guys to come in and go in. And that's why I think this flywheel is now moving at a good speed.
Yeah, so it seems like things are falling to place like really well. So yeah, I wanted to leave one last question before we're coming to the end of the chat, right? And you can take it any way you want. About the flywheel concept, right? If India's flywheel is only 5 years in, uh, what has to be true from now for you, from now and from now on, for you to say that the bet on non-linear technology is right? You talked about the government creating an environment and industry creating an environment that makes future bets de-risked. Are there other things that you think should be called out?
Yeah, I think the momentum is pretty high, and this is what you need to keep up, right? You need to come back every day to do better than what you did before. And if you could sort of do that even in an incremental form, we're going to produce some outstanding companies globally relevant from here in the years to come, right? I don't think there's a missing element at this point of time. I think we just need to put heads down and execute. We've got less things to complain about and more things to build.
Yeah. Do work incrementally and build that momentum. I think that's a really good thing to like maintain. So Vishesh, I want to say it's been like a pleasure chatting with you about like how industry and VC industries work in another part of the world. Like before we leave, are there any ways that anybody who's interested in the region and interested in chatting with you and your companies, any way that they can reach out to you that you recommend?
Yeah, we've got our email ID on the website, and I read all emails that come to that email ID. So that's a great way to get my attention is to just drop an email.
Okay, there we go. Go to Speciale Invest. Look for Vishesh's email. Okay, so Vishesh, I just want to say a really big thank you for joining us on this call, and like yeah, hope to have you in future calls where we can like talk to other new wins that you've had in the firm. And
Thank you for having me, and thank you for getting us to talk about what we're building from India for the world. Really appreciate it.
yeah, glad that you're here.